Good afternoon. Welcome to the Engineering and Construction webinar series focused on sustainability and energy. Today with us we have Zenovia Wilcox. She is the Criteria Program Manager for the headquarters of the U.S. Department of the Army Corps of Engineers. Today she will be talking with us about the Standards and Criteria Program. But first I want to give you a little introduction on our webinar series as we're kicking off for 2016. We have these usually on Tuesdays, but today we're doing it on a Thursday for scheduling reasons. We've had a little bit of a snow issue here in DC. But you can get learning units or continuing education units for these in groups of 5. 5 webinars are on one quiz. You can download from the what we call the Mercy site for sustainability and energy. The link is on the screen. Fill out the answers to the quiz and email them to the email address at the bottom of the screen, s_ewebinar@usacearmy.mil. And if you get them correctly, then you will be issued the credit. We will file it for you with AIA if you're an AIA member, and send us your number. We will be taking questions at the end, and I'll announce that when we get to that point for the process of doing that. This is being recorded, and hopefully we'll have it posted once we can download it in about a week or two on that sustainability site. With that, I will now turn it over to Zenovia Wilcox.
Good afternoon. My name is Zenovia Wilcox, and I serve as the Standards and Criteria Program Manager at the headquarters. I also serve as the Specifications Community of Practice Leader. One of the purposes of putting this presentation together is really to introduce everyone to the Unified Facilities Program and to provide an overview on the program and to encourage you to, step out of your comfort zones and to volunteer for UFC and UFGS updates. So annually we put together a program of criteria updates. We decide which documents we're going to update based on the Army campaign plan, based on new legislation, based on other policy documents that come down from the Pentagon. That's how we decide what we're going to work on from year to year. And so with that, I'll launch into the Unified Facilities Criteria Program overview. So at the end of this presentation, what we would like for you to have a better understanding on is the Tri-Service Program in general, the policy documents that guide the Tri-Service Program. We'd like for you to have a better understanding of how the Tri-Service Criteria Program is managed, how we develop, update, and maintain our Unified Facilities Guide specifications. I'd like to highlight how you can more effectively use the specifications in your projects, and then cover how to submit criteria change requests for UFCs and UFGS documents. So the UFC program was basically, it came into existence with the enactment of legislation in 1996, which required the DoD to use commercial standards. So it required DoD to move away from unique standards that only serve the purposes of DoD and to defer to commercial standards to the greatest extent possible. And so most of you are aware of those commercial standards, those commercial codes that are out there, the IBC, NFPA, ASHRAE. And then in 1999, the Executive Senior Engineering Panel was established. And so under that panel, which covers the engineering services, Army, Navy, Air Force, so those senior leaders had a mandate to standardize and unify the DoD criteria to the greatest extent possible. The ESEP also established a coordinating panel that oversees the annual program. And then in 2002, there was another memo that came out that actually created the Unified Facilities Criteria Program. And so that unification and that whole criteria program affects all new construction, repair, maintenance projects across all of the DoD facilities. In 2003, there was an MOA that was established between the ESEP and the National Institute of Building Sciences, NIBS, and that helped to then facilitate the establishment of the whole building design guide. And so the whole building design guide is where we store all of our UFCs and all of our UFGSs. Okay, so now on this screen here, you have basically a triangle that basically shows how the UFCs are developed and how they overlay one on top of the other. And so we start with the basic safety criteria being the consensus code. So the IBC and the ASHRAE and NFPA. And so we start with the basic industry standards, and then we go up. And so on the screen, then you have a bridge document that takes you from the basic safety criteria up to any enhanced safety legislation and policy documents. The document that's missing there, that is the bridge document that I believe most of you are aware of, is UFC 1200-01. That should be on the screen. So UFC 1200-01 is the document that bridges the industry standards and then overlays the rest of the functional requirements that goes into our UFCs and our UFGSs. So then that document bridges the enhanced safety and legislation that deals with anti-terrorism, force protection, deals with accessibility, deals with any new energy mandates, environmental sustainability mandates that come out. And so then that goes across the first 31 core UFCs. And then from there, we build on more functionality when we get into specific facility types. And so that's where we then have the specific facility types that covers like fire station and aquatic facilities and storage facilities, warehouses, depots. The document that we're working on right now, which is a big document, is the new unified aircraft hangar maintenance UFC. We're in the process of developing that. And so then from there we go up to the quality, and that's where our UFCs come into play. And so overall, we have 198 active UFC documents. The FC stands for facility criteria. And so there are some facility types that are only applicable for certain agencies, and so there's no need to unify on those facilities. And so we'll have an FC document, meaning that it's a facility criteria document and it's only applicable to the one service. So typically when you see a document that is designated as a UFC, that means that there is unification on the core requirements for that particular discipline or that particular facility type. And then there may be some minor caveats that are agency specific. So unified facilities criteria in terms of a policy overview. So I wanted to make sure that those that are on the line have a clear understanding of what our policy documents are and how they actually govern the program. So the first document is the MIL Standard 3007. So that is the actual policy document that governs and help to establish the Tri-Service Criteria Program. And so again, that document reinforces the requirement for DoD to standardize its construction criteria across all the agencies. That document further clearly establishes the roles and the responsibilities of the ESEP and the DWG which is the discipline working groups. And so then under the Tri-Service UFC and UFGS program, you have the Executive Senior Engineering Panel. And so there is a senior engineering panel representative from each one of the agencies. So Mr. Dalton serves on that panel for USACE. Then there are a total of 21 discipline working groups. And then there's also the coordinating panel that, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's responsible for establishing the annual Tri-Service program, which documents will be updated for that particular year. It tracks the updates, and the CP actually publishes an annual program which identifies what was actually completed for that year. So then for USACE, I'd like to then further draw your attention to ER 1110-1-8155. That is basically the implementation ER that governs our specifications and how the specifications are used in our projects. And then we have ER 15-1-41. That document governs the Core Specification Steering Committee. And so for those of you that are not familiar with the Core Specification Steering Committee, that is a committee that is composed of representatives from each one of the divisions, and it has 4 subject matter representatives from the districts that are actively involved in projects on the MILCON and on the civil works side. So there are about 12 people who actually serve on that committee, and we meet annually. And we meet 4 times a year, 2 face-to-face meetings and 2 telephonic meetings. And we talk about specifications policy, and we talk about best practices, and we talk about revisions and changes that need to happen to our specifications. Both of those ERs were recently updated. Both of those ERs were updated in October of 2015. So if you haven't seen those updates, I would encourage you to go out there and pull them down and get a copy of them and review them. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email, and I would be happy to get back with you. So then under the Unified Facilities Criteria, the 2 primary documents that you should be aware of is UFC 1300-01. That's the UFC that governs the UFC format and how UFCs are actually developed and how they integrate with the other UFCs. And then the second document is UFC 1300-02. That's the document that covers the UFGS format standards. So that document further implements CSI, Construction Specifications Institute. It provides additional information on how to format specifications, the methodology behind the development of specifications. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 21 discipline working groups. So there are discipline working groups that follow the basic engineering disciplines, such as architectural, civil, electrical, fire protection, mechanical, structural, and then there are functional working groups that actually follow a functional area, such as aviation or contingency engineering or medical or pavement airfields. The 2 new functional working groups that were developed that were stood up in the last year and a half is renewable energy generation and utility control. And so each one of the agencies has a representative that serves on these discipline working groups. And so we work together to help identify the criteria that's relevant to these areas, to help unify to the greatest extent possible the criteria, to identify exceptions that we cannot unify on, and to try to make sure that we keep that to a minimum, because as I said, our mandate is to unify the criteria to the greatest extent possible. So again, there are 21 discipline working groups at this time. So we use the criteria management system that is housed on the whole building design guide to manage our criteria projects. So within that system, we actually have all of our UFCs and all of our UFGS documents identified, and then they're broken down by discipline working group. And so that sort of runs on the in the background. So not everyone has access to the criteria management system. So it's open to those people who are actually discipline working group members. And so that's where we actually manage our annual programs. We have the ability on the criteria management system to actually have the active year right now, which is FY16, and to have 2 out years. So we are actually in the process of developing the FY17 and also looking at the FY18 program. And so it's within this system itself that we actually request and approve new documents. We request and approve revisions to new documents, and we also manage criteria changes to existing documents. We manage the actual project reviews, so we actually have the ability to set up a actual update project on a particular document, and then we have a comment functionality on the system as well, and we have the ability to track and address criteria change requests that come in via the whole building design guide. And so one of the new features that was recently added to the criteria management system is the ability to have a guest reviewer link for project reviews. So that allows us to have any of you be a guest reviewer on a particular project. So when you actually went in as a guest reviewer, you would be able to just see some things. So some things would be read only, but you would only be able to, you would only have comment functionality as a guest reviewer on a particular project. And from within the criteria management system, we have email functionality, and we can also run reports. So then, some of the roles and responsibilities within the criteria management system is, as I said, so you can be a discipline working group member, and so we have 1 member from each service. The discipline working groups are responsible for managing the documents, managing the updates of the documents. The discipline working groups are responsible for recommending when a document should be updated. They're responsible for determining how often a document is updated. So like UFCs have a update cycle of some are annual, so every year ones that receive a lot of use, like 1-200-01 or 3-101-01, which is the architectural UFC. And then it can range from annually to every 3 years or every 5 years on a UFC document. UFGSs are updated on a 3-year time frame. So the update times for those are 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 9 years, depending on the frequency of use. So some of the additional roles and responsibilities within CMS are technical authority or preparing agency. So that role that's the service that's responsible for leading the update on that particular document. Then you can also be a technical proponent. So if you are a technical proponent and you are the technical proponent on a particular document, that means that you're responsible for maintaining that document, you're responsible for trying to unify that document as much as possible. And for the people that are on the line right now listening to this presentation, I would like to encourage you to consider being a technical representative on a document. So when you are a technical representative on a document, that means that we would go into the criteria management system, and in the appropriate slot, we would add your name as a technical representative. So what that means is that when there are criteria change requests that come in, not that you're responsible for the criteria change request, but you would receive an email notification letting you know that a criteria change request has been submitted for a particular document. So if you have a particular passion for a certain area and you want to be aware and cognizant of changes that may be coming down on a particular specification, if you are identified as a technical representative, that would help you to, stay on the front lines of what's happening with that particular spec section or spec sections. Then also within CMS, we have roles and responsibilities associated with project leads and guest reviewers as well. So some of the questions that I receive from people, and as I'm dealing with people on our guide specifications, is why do we take it upon ourselves to develop guide specifications? Why not just let every district develop their own guide specifications? Well, there are a lot of reasons why we choose to use master guide specifications. From our standpoint at the headquarters, we have found that it is an effective way to standardize project requirements. So one of the things that we are responsible for is making sure that the end users, when one end user at one installation gets a barracks building at one installation, and when another end user at another installation gets a barracks building, we have a responsibility to make sure that both of those users are getting a facility that is of like quality, that both of those users are getting a facility that is going to be able to be maintained at about the same level, same baseline. So that's one of the real benefits of using Unified Facilities Guide specifications, is that we can standardize project requirements across installations. We can improve the efficiency of tailoring a specification for each individual project. Having a guide specification also allows the designers in the field to focus on the end user's requirements in that project, and it frees them up from not spending so much time on formatting and reformatting and shifting and paragraphs and articles. And so we take it upon ourselves to do that at the headquarters level so that you can spend your valuable time focused on user requirements and making sure that the design for that particular project is going to meet the user's requirements. Using a master guide specification also helps us ensure a minimum level of quality in the project. It helps us in the bidding, in the RFP process, so that we can make sure that we're comparing apples to apples. So that's the benefit of having a standard guide specification. So when you actually download a guide specification off of the Whole Building Design Guide, One of the things that when you look at it, there's certain information that you should readily be able to glean when you look at that specification. You should know that the specification is basically a performance specification, that to the greatest extent possible, we have stripped out as much of the prescriptive requirements in the specification as possible, while still allowing the construction contractor to have enough flexibility to innovate and to provide us the best product possible, while also guaranteeing that we're going to get that minimal level of quality. We develop our specifications based on industry reference standards, so we don't have to write out everything over and over and over. We can just refer to a particular standard, and then the onus is on the construction contractor to then go and get that standard and be familiar with how it needs to be implemented on the project. The specifications are set up in a 3-part format. So you have the general, which is all of the references that are pertinent to that particular spec section. It has all of the definitions spelled out, so that when we use a certain term, that term is clearly understood by the person reading the specification. We have part 2, which is the products. Then we have part 3, which is the execution. So when you're actually looking at a spec section, that top banner should tell you all the information that you need to know. It shows the current revision date of that document. It identifies if there has been a change to the document. It identifies if it's been recently superseded. It has a specification number. It tells you if the section is a unified section just based on the numbering format for the particular spec section. It tells you who the preparing agency is, so who the owner is of that document, and the person or the agency that's responsible for maintaining that document. You should be aware of all of that sort of banner information, which is at the very top in the screenshot. At the very top, all of that information should be very familiar with you, to you. So in terms of our specifications overview, we have 836 documents that are out there on the whole building design guide. Of those 836, 67% of them are unified, and unified means that there are common requirements that we've agreed to. And when I say we, I mean Army, Air Force, and Navy. And so, and NASA as well. And so then the breakdown by preparing agency. So you'll see that Army and Navy are running about neck and neck. So we are each responsible for about the same number of specification sections. And then NASA is responsible for 72 sections. Then the next thing you'll see is the numbering designators. So if you can see it on your screen in the lower screenshot, that screenshot is a screenshot of the project schedule specification. And so just based on that number, you'll see the first 3 numbers is actually the spec number, and then the dot, then 0010 designates that spec section as the Army spec section. So if you went out there and you had two specification sections that said project schedule, and if you're Army, you want to make sure you pick the .0010, because that would be the appropriate one to use for a USACE project. And so I'll pause right here just for a moment. And so from my standpoint, when you're trying to put together a presentation like this, you're not always aware of who's actually going to dial in and listen to the webinar. And so for that reason, I've tried to make sure I cover some some very elementary information for anybody that's online, that's new to USACE and doesn't really understand how our master specifications are developed. So for you people who are experienced, I do apologize for that, but it's necessary to cover a wide breadth of information, not really knowing who's going to be on the webinar. So moving on. So as I've stated, our master guide specifications are hosted on the Whole Building Design Guide website, and most of you probably knew that already, but the reason why I wanted to highlight that is that if you have some free time, I really would encourage you to go out there to the Whole Building Design Guide. So they not only house all of the repository of criteria for Army, Air Force, and Navy, but they also house a lot of criteria information for a lot of the other agencies that are out there, like Department of Energy on their FENT program. So there's a lot of good information out there on the Whole Building Design Guide. Next, our UFGSs are updated quarterly, and so here are the dates here of when the releases come out. And so the next release that's due to come out is the 1 February release. So what I'm going to highlight there is that some people have said to me, well, why does it take so long to get our specs updated? And so what I'm going to say to you is that when you're working, let's say you're the project lead on updating a spec section, and so you're working, and so you get to about the August timeframe, and you're just about finished with your update. If you send your update to Sharon Belcher in Huntsville, because she's our database manager, she's our UFGS database manager. If you send her your update the middle of October, you've guaranteed yourself that update will not make it into the 1 November update release date. It will be pushed until the 1 February release date. So I'm really just trying to highlight so that you understand that if the release is going to come out on 1 November, and you want your updated section to be in that 1 November release date, you should try, if at all possible, to have your update completed and approved by your headquarters proponent and to Sharon Belcher about the 30th of August in order for it to make the 1 November release date. So that's really why I'm highlighting that in this presentation. Our Unified Facilities Guide specifications, they're published in an electronic format. We use the Specs Intact software to process our master guide specifications, and Specs Intact is a government off-the-shelf software that's created and maintained by NASA. And so I'm not sure if you are aware, but if you use Specs Intact on a regular basis, and if there's just some functionality that you were just wishing and hoping that they would actually add into Specs Intact, you can send me an email as well, because I work with NASA and I can actually submit a change request on the software as well. And so then after they actually evaluate that software change request, you will get a response as to whether it's been accepted, whether it's been approved, and prioritized for actual programming and implementation into the software. So you have the ability to affect a change in Specs Intact as well. And so on this next slide, I wanted to highlight to you some of the areas that actually impact the development and maintenance of our specifications. So we have to make sure that we respond to all executive orders and laws that impact our construction. We have to make sure that we're coordinated with Army and USACE regulations. To the greatest extent possible, we make sure that we coordinate with our tri-service community. And any other DoD directives. So on these next slides, I wanted to highlight some of the benefits of maintaining the master guide specifications. So from our standpoint, it helps reduce construction costs. It allows us to make changes to our master guide specifications globally. So with a few simple keystrokes, we can make changes when it is absolutely necessary to all 836 specifications very quickly. It allows us to implement new technologies faster across all specifications when there's a new technology that affects the enterprise approach of how we work. I wanted to also highlight some of the strategies for using UFGSs in your projects. You want to make sure that you're using the most current version. We have a new version out there that's been approved by ACIT, so version 4.6.0. So please, if you haven't had that downloaded to your machine, please contact ACIT and put in a service ticket to get that. You want to make sure that you're using the most current data set available. You want to make sure you select the appropriate specification section for your project. And so with that, I think I'm going to stop at that moment. There are a few other slides that you can feel free to go through. I think we may be bumping up against a timeline. I wanted to open it up for questions. Eric, I'm going to go ahead and yield to you because a lot of these last slides are just overview slides.
Okay. All right, let me scroll back up to, we've had several questions come in as you were talking. If I can scroll back and see where we left those off. As well, basically, folks, if you want to submit a question, there's the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. If you want to go ahead and type in your question there, and then we can get them answered. The first one was asking if the intent was for the UFCs to supersede Army regulations, and if so, is there a memorandum that identifies that policy?
It is intended that UFCs are basically a unified approach to how we develop our criteria, and then a unified approach to how we actually execute our criteria. So to the greatest extent possible, what we try to do is make sure that we are working coherently with Army policy. And so if there's a specific area that you have a concern, then what you do is you can send an email to me, or you can go into the whole building design guide and submit a criteria change request and ask your question, because it's quite possible that something has been overlooked. But to the greatest extent possible, the UFC is really supposed to implement Army policy.
Okay, the next question is basically was if the slides would be available. If you point, as I pointed out on the chat box, for those who may also be interested, there's a little icon to the left under the slide, to the left corner of that middle area, that looks like a down arrow pointing into a inbox apparently. And basically, if you click on that, you can download the slides. There's 3 different versions on there. They're all the same, just one is a PowerPoint format, one's a PDF format, and another one's an old PowerPoint format. Now somebody else asked, is there a list of the 21, oops, oh, it's bouncing around on me. Is there a list of the 21 discipline working group points of contact available?
I can provide that list. If you send me an email, I can provide that list.
Okay. And will the whole building design guide help with getting Green Globe certification or LEED certification?
No, they will not. Well, Um, I'm asking for a clarification. So what does that person mean by help with getting Green Globes certification?
Roland, if you can follow up, we'll get back to you. It just says, will the WBDG help with GBC/lead? So we'll get back to Roland after he, or was that from Mark? I'm not sure which name goes with which. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Somebody asked why both IBC and NFPA, which is the fire code, are referenced. I think that's a little beyond the scope of the presentation, Zenovia. But if you have anything to comment on that, they're asking why the UFC 1-200 and 3-600-1, the building codes, mix the IBC and the NFPA 101 model codes.
I can't answer that question. I mean, I know that there are some differences, but you really have to get with the fire protection people and ask why they have picked to use certain NFPA standards in some cases and an IBC standard in another case.
Okay, and somebody also followed up and said on the CCRs, they said, is there a feedback process for submissions of the criteria change requests?
Yes, there is a feedback process, and what happens is when you actually submit a CCR, you will get a CCR number, and your name and email address will be associated with that CCR. So I think what the person may be really asking is, why does it take a little longer than they might expect to get a response to a CCR? And that's a different question. And the reason why I'm stating that is because when I have responded back to a CCR and when I mark the CCR as approved, when I mark it as approved, there is a notification, so a feedback link that goes back to the person that actually submitted the CCR. So I do know that there is a feedback that goes back to the submitter.
Okay. Now somebody else pointed out that the spec syntax version 4.6.1.990 is now approved. And somebody also said that ACIT told them to use Service Track. Service Track is a system run by ACIT, so they are one of the same. The Service Track system allows your work request to be tracked, and you can log in and check your open tickets and all that kind of stuff. Similar to if you wrote the number down when you used to call in. I think they're trying to get more people to use their online system. Let's see. Pressure is mounting on small projects. Is there guidance? Oops, sorry, I keep jumping around. Is there guidance to permit some flexibility to portions of the UFC when a streamlined or simplified design is desired by the stakeholders?
Okay. At this moment, I am not aware of any plan to try to develop a set of UFCs that are only applicable to small projects or to renovation projects. So you have to just use the UFCs that we have out there right now and apply them to the best of your ability to your small project.
Okay. Oh, and Roland, getting back, Roland Langford followed up and said he was asking if the design goals consider lead goals in the UFCs.
Lead goals specifically?
I believe so. I mean, I think. If I could address some of this, since I'm a technical person on there as well, technical viewer. We had a lot of notes to the designer to give them guidance on how parts of the specifications would dovetail into lead requirements, and I think you have some guidance on the submissions and things like that. There's now an effort to kind of de-proprietarize the UFGSs, so we're going toward a neutral third-party certification language. But in the notes to the designer, there's still some references to a lot of the lead stuff and things pertinent to that. Since we have very high performance and sustainable building criteria and mandates, they do overlap quite a bit, and usually those things are identified where they do overlap. And there's some more comments on the specs intact. Somebody asked why the questions are skipping around. I'm trying to group things in similarity, but also this thing keeps popping up and down as people type in things. I'm not meaning to skip anybody, but if somebody was skipped, I apologize for that. Also, there's a couple people, Zenovia, that are asking if they can volunteer to be a technical representative or a guest reviewer. Should they send you an email, or
Absolutely.
how would they step up if they wanted to?
No, absolutely. Send me an email, and in that email, tell me if there's a particular spec section you would like to be associated with, and I will get it to the right person and copy you when I forward it to the right person. So of course, if it's architectural, then you would be sending it to me, and I would be distributing it to members of the architectural branch, because we have divided up responsibility for the architectural specifications. If it's for another discipline, I will forward it to that headquarters POC, and you'll be copied.
Okay, and I think that covered most. Folks, I'm going to skip. There's some back and it looked like a bit of a sidebar going on in the chat window about the specs intact versions. I don't know if we can really get into that as to whether or not to upgrade. Might have a conversation with the system compatibility of what you're running your system on with the different versions. I think that's kind of out of our scope as well. Plus the fact that we're a bit over the hour. Zenovia, I want to thank you very much. I apologize profusely for our little chaotic interlude there, but I'm going to see if I can edit that out with the audio troubles.